WNST, Towson, Baltimore, the Charm City. Of course, the Ravens going on the road out to Oakland on Sunday. The Terps going out to the Horseshoe in Columbus over the weekend. Hockey facing off, and Major League Baseball being played nearby, but not quite here at Camden Yards. Luke Jones joins us now to preview all things MLB playoffs now that the Yankees and the Arizona Diamondbacks have held serve. But I guess, Luke, before we go forward into the American and National League Division Series this weekend, the wild card games, I mean, nervous pitching, right? I mean, that's what the one-game playoff has become all about, nervous starting pitching, right?
Yeah, and it really reflects where we're heading in this game. I mean, we've seen more and more over the last few years the emphasis on bullpen. Brian Kenny even calls it bullpenning, has actually deemed it a verb at this point. But you really saw that in both wildcard games. The starters, now keep in mind, these starters didn't pitch well, but 7 1/3 combined innings from the 4 starters. They gave up 15 earned runs, and they weren't in the game long. It was a quick hook, and it has to be. And
that kid Gray looked like he was about to pee down his legs in Arizona on Wednesday night.
Yeah. I mean, Severino did not look good on Tuesday night. I mean, it was a quick hook, and I get it. It's an elimination game. It's do or die. It's game 7, so to speak. But it does really reflect where baseball has been, where it's going, and I don't think it's really changing. Save for an unbelievable surplus of Clayton Kershaw's to arrive on the scene suddenly. This is what the game is becoming more and more. We're seeing more emphasis on the bullpen. Teams like the Orioles have used so many different roster moves to keep their bullpens fresh. It's where we're going as a game. I don't know if it's necessarily good for the game, but I feel from an intellectual standpoint, we've gotten to the point where we say, you know what? What is the point? Unless I have a really special starting pitcher, what is the point trying to get 6, 7, 8 innings out of that guy rather than I'll go with that guy until the wheels come off a little bit or he runs into trouble, and then I'll go to any one of 5 or 6 options I have in the bullpen that I feel really, really good about. I mean, look how the Yankees handled it. It's just across the board. All these teams went to standout relievers that they had, and they were able to get through the game that way. So clearly the Yankees and the Diamondbacks left standing, but that's kind of the big takeaway from me in watching these 2 games. And I don't expect it to be quite as dramatic when you get into the 5-game format or the 7-game format once we get beyond the division series. But we saw last year, I mean, the Cleveland Indians got to game 7 with basically 2.5 starters. They used 3 starters during the playoffs out of necessity, but they had the kind of bullpen they could do it. So I think we're going to see that once again, and as a result, probably going to see a lot more of these 4-hour games in the postseason as well, which is another issue as far as whether that's good for baseball or not.
Before we get to these matchups, and I think they are very compelling matchups, and the home teams won and all that stuff, the best teams are playing here this weekend, so for that we're happy. And I like wall-to-wall baseball myself. Reminds me of my childhood, and a little chill in the air and the shadows over the bunting and all that stuff. Do you think they're going to make this thing a 3-gamer at some point? I mean, are they going to stretch this thing? I don't know how they could do that and make all the other teams sit around and wait 5 days.
Yeah, it's so tough. And I've said this to you.
I hope they don't, by the way. I like it the way it is. It's fine.
I was just going to say, I'm the first to admit that when they first introduced this in 2012, I was very much against the idea of playing 1 game compared to a 162-game season. I think I did the math, and I tried to look at the proportion of that compared to a 1-game playoff in the NFL. And I feel like it was the equivalent of playing a 6 or 7 minute game in the NFL to decide a playoff matchup. So I mean, I get that, but at the same time, it just provides that much more incentive for what? Win your division. For the longest time, when we had the 1 wild card format in each league, you were a wild card, and it really wasn't much of a penalty compared to the division winner. So I think in doing this, 1, it creates drama, and Lord knows this sport needs that. I mean, as much as I love the format of a long season and it's there every night, you like having that urgency. You like having that elimination game kind of a format. And really the way I view it is not so much, it's a playoff game, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of like that game 163 kind of format where you have a tiebreaker situation. And that's essentially what this has become. But I like it. If it hasn't changed at this point, where we haven't gone to a 3-game format, I'm not sure it's going to. I think that this is something where it's exciting to have.
Baseball leads off this, the most exciting games of the year. I don't know why they would bag it at this point, right?
Right. I think, considering you're not guaranteed a Game 7 or a Game 5 in any of these series, and, we've seen years where it's been a little more lopsided, the fact that you have a winner-take-all game, at least 2 of those built into the beginning of your postseason, I think it's a good thing. So I hope we don't see a change. I know there have been different formats proposed, 3 games, or you start talking about runs scored. I don't want any of that. Just give me a one game. The top wild card gets home field, so they get an advantage there. But the reality is, hey, if you want to be guaranteed more than 1 game, win your division. It's that simple, and that's where we have gotten to the point for years where we weren't rewarding division winners as much as we should have. Now we are, and I think this is a nice compromise. And like I said, as much as I didn't like the format when it began, with the idea of it coming down to 1 game after you play 162, I think it's made for great theater. The Orioles were on the short end of that last year, certainly.
Well, not really. They got 11 innings. You know what I mean? So that's part of the one game. We were in it last year. But it's incredibly exciting when it's in the 11th inning, I think, right? Then it is 2 games, right?
Yeah, and I just meant the Orioles were on the losing end. I'm not complaining about it. It's just, that's just what it comes down to.
But it was really exciting. I think we kind of forget. Sure. Last year we were in the game, and these games weren't particularly great, although there were comebacks. But, when it's 3-4-5 nothing in the first inning and, heads are rolling, and the game's going to be 4.5 hours long, that going in. I
did like the Arizona game. How about 4 triples? I looked it up. The Orioles had 12 triples on the season.
The Blue Jays had 5 on the season.
Yeah,
5 on the season.
so 4, and one of them was a pitcher. That was a pretty good ball game. As much as clearly the Yankees fell behind early to the Twins, and then they battled back, and Gregorius hits the home run. I enjoyed that Diamondbacks-Rockies game. We didn't, us being in Baltimore, us being on the East Coast, it's not as though we saw Arizona and Colorado play a whole lot this year.
But it was 7-0 at 10 o'clock.
It was. No, you're absolutely right.
It was 7-0.
No, you're right. But those 2 teams, the Dodgers ran away with things when they went on that stretch, that 50-game stretch where they won 43. But those 2 teams, let's face it, no one expected Arizona or Colorado. No one was talking about them. If there was going to be a wild card in that division, people were talking more likely that it'd be the Giants, and they were terrible this year. But I think it was cool to see those 2 teams share the spotlight for one night. And Arizona was better than the Rockies over the course of the year, and that ultimately they prevailed in the end. And again, seeing a pitcher hit a triple and then give up a couple home runs in the next inning, that was pretty interesting to see.
We will be watching baseball all weekend. The Red Sox at the Astros, the Yankees at the Indians, and, of course, the National League gets going on Friday evening. The Cubs at the Nationals in the early game, and then the Dodgers are going to host the Diamondbacks all night long. It happens quickly around here, especially in this American League Series where they just get after it right away and start playing games, and we start to see the home team really start to slide down the mountain if they lose one of these games. I always say Houston and Cleveland and Washington and the Dodgers, you better win game 1, especially in this series.
Oh, there's no question about it. You're on alert very quickly. A 5-game series, it sounds like a lot when you go into it, but it's not. Think about it. How many times do teams lose 3 out of 4 over the course of a season? It can spiral quickly, and especially you lose at home. That's why it was surprising. So many people have talked about this. I'm not the first to make this point, but Cleveland to hold off on Kluber until game 2 and go with Trevor Bauer, who's not a bad pitcher. He won 17 games, but 4.19 ERA. Corey Kluber's been unbelievable this year. I was surprised to see that. And look, Terry Francona's built up enough credit, built up enough trust that if he does something, you just kind of say, okay, well, I trust you, Tito.
We thought that about Buck when he had Britton in the bullpen last year, too, remember?
Yeah, you would think so. But that really lends itself to your point that, if you drop that first game with Sonny Gray going against Bauer, then right away you lose home field, and then you're in a position where, okay, Kluber could go game 2 and you win, but what happens if you go back to New York and you lose the next 2? You don't even get to Kluber in Game 5. So that's certainly something that's going to be interesting to watch. Certainly interested to watch Justin Verlander make the start for the Astros. I mean, that's I think there was some question when he first was acquired at the waiver trade deadline at the end of August, whether it would be him or Keuchel to kind of be that ace. And Verlander's pitched exceptionally well.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we sit here for 2 months, every year, you and I, all during June, all during July, discuss whether the Orioles are buyers or sellers and who's going to be in the market. And you look up, Sonny Gray starting for the Yankees, Verlander starting for the Astros, Yu Darvish is starting for the Dodgers. So, it'll be a part of all of this that these trades, much like last year with Andrew Miller, much like last year with the Chapman and the Yankees and the Cubs and, swapping players around, that, those players do. I saw Gerardo Parra swinging the bat on Wednesday night, hitting .309 in Colorado and saying, is that the same dude? I mean, so these names do pop up in the postseason.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, the question is, do they make the impact? I mean, I think John Lester in 2014 going to Oakland. Remember, I mean, the A's were so good.
I almost forgot about that, dude. Like
right, that. Well, but that's the whole point. You forget about it because he ended up being a zero in that wild card game, and Kansas City ended up coming back and winning. So they're always part of the narrative. It's just the question of, does that end up being the piece that puts you over the top or not? And if it's not, then you look back and you say, well, what pieces from your farm system did you give up? And look, I'm not saying that that's an argument not to trade, but you do run the risk of that. Just because you make a trade, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to win it. So that's where it becomes very interesting, and that's where guys like Sonny Gray are under pressure to perform. Guys like Justin Verlander are under pressure to perform, to put their teams over the hump, because that team inherently, they took some kind of risk, either in prospects or in the case of Verlander, taking on a lot of salary for a pitcher who's on the wrong side of 30, that you hope it works out, because if not, then you're going to be, it's just like the Orioles hear about Eduardo Rodriguez every year when they face him. So, that's just the risk you run, and you got to play the game, and it's got to work. If it doesn't work out, then you're going to be hearing about it for a long time.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. All right, so here comes the part where I ask you the tough question. Remember back in March, and I said the Orioles would have 77 wins and finish with 75, and now we get the tournament out, and I do see out on MLB.com there are brackets, much like basketball. We can pick this thing. I dare I say I don't know how hard a tournament this is going to be to pick. I would just say watch out for the Red Sox. That's been my feeling all along. Is there a little bit of a snake in the weeds here? They're seeing the Astros. I know they're seeing tough pitching. I know it's going to be tough to go down there and play. Just watch out for the Red Sox. That would be the only team I would say. I don't feel that way about the Cubs. And obviously you could say, well, I like the Dodgers, or I like the Nationals, or I like the Indians. Well, who doesn't? But give me the Red Sox for a long shot here. If I had to put $10 down on a team that's a little distant out in this, I say beware them. That's all.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, you even use the term long shot, and I hear what you're saying, but it kind of really speaks to how they are lying in the weeds, how they are just kind of flying below the radar. I think a couple things come to mind for the Red Sox. I mean, one, their starting pitching, I think, has been underrated. I think the fact that they have David Price, who's most likely going to fill that almost like an Andrew Miller kind of role, which, if I'm a Red Sox fan, I'd be nervous about what effect that has on his elbow, considering the issues he had earlier this year. But you have that. And the other thing about the Red Sox offense, as much as that offense underachieved for a large portion of the season, it's not as though they didn't score runs as the year went on, but they don't rely on the home runs. And what do we know about the postseason? We've seen this with the Orioles. You get into October where it's colder, the ball's not traveling as much. you have to be able to score runs without just hitting the long ball. I mean, and it's kind of crazy to say that. I mean, we talk about the Orioles, but the home run is just so prevalent in today's game. And yes, we saw home runs in the wild card game, so it's not as though they were absent there just because we're talking about postseason baseball. But the Red Sox do have the ability to score runs without hitting a ton of home runs, and they had to adjust without David Ortiz, and they had a lot of growing pains this year with that offense. But it seems like they kind of got themselves into a mode where, okay, they're not hitting the long ball, but they're still finding ways to score runs. So that's something to keep in mind, absolutely. And kind of the other thing that just comes to mind for me, not related to the Red Sox, but as much as the Nationals on paper look like a team to that should be able to at least get to the NLCS to face the Dodgers. Keep in mind that Max Scherzer issue with the hamstring. He's been adamant that he's going to pitch, but if he can't, or if he goes out there and it doesn't go well, that rotation looks different. It's still very good, don't get me wrong, but Scherzer is that bulldog. He's the ace of that rotation. If he can't go, then that changes things dramatically for a Nats team that, let's face it, has really struggled to kind of break through that glass ceiling of just winning a series, even though they've been favored, even though they've been the best team in the NL in past years. If they can't have Scherzer, if he's not right, if he goes and he can't be the Max Scherzer that he's capable of being, you do wonder if those doubts start to creep into their mind. So I'm going to be watching that as well as as someone who doesn't root for DC sports teams, but certainly the Nationals trying to break through after so many years of being so good in the regular season and just falling on their face come October.
I want to hate him, but I know that deep down Mr. Angelos would hate a parade in D.C., even though it would make him more money. So I'm very, very conflicted on this, and certainly, I'm not about seeing the Red Sox or the Yankees win anything.
Right.
I don't hate those poor people in Cleveland, as you and I have pointed out, but I am wearing my Dodgers hat. I will have my Dodger cap on throughout this thing just because they were nice to me, and I love Chavez Ravine, and, well, the painted sky at Dodger Stadium is worth seeing for bunting in a World Series game. But it is a great tournament. I don't have any love or hatred for any of these teams other than just we're going to sit around all week and hopefully watch some good baseball. I think we have that in play, and there is this sort of wall-to-wall baseball thing that's going to be happening the next 3 weeks that guys like you and I like every night, right?
I love it. And, I think, even if you're someone who doesn't want to see the Red Sox or the Yankees, and I don't want to, I think the way those teams are constructed right now, they're going to be here year after year for a while. I mean, it's just they both have youth. They both have high-priced players playing at a high level.
They both have money they're willing to spend as opposed to Mr. Angelos, who prefer to put it in his pocket.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, they always have the money, but the thing is they have young, controllable talent now on top of having the money that they have every year. So that just makes them that much more dangerous. That's why, I'd love to see Houston or Cleveland. I mean, Houston we've never seen. Cleveland, I haven't seen it in my lifetime, and many people haven't seen in their lifetime. It's been since 48 for them. The Indians are the new Cubs when it comes to that, so I think it's easy
for
to
the love of Bob Feller and Andre Thornton.
Yeah. Even if they're the proverbial favorites with the way they've played over the last 2 months in the American League, they're still the underdog because hey, they're the Indians. I mean, they had movies made about how inept their team was. So you have that, and the National League, I'd be fine with. I don't really have any disdain for any of those teams. I mean, we just saw the Cubs win it last year, so we don't want Cubs fans to get too big of an ego that they don't already have. So, I'm not going to root for the Nationals, but it's not as though I'm going to lose sleep over that. The Dodgers, it's been nearly 30 years for them now, so it'd be interesting to see that. And don't sleep on Arizona. I mean, that's a team that we saw firsthand on Wednesday night. That's certainly a team that is capable. The J.D. Martinez acquisition for them was so huge. And that's a team that, as much as we talk about the Dodgers because they won over 100 games, Arizona quietly won 93 games. So we're not talking about a team that's a scrub there whatsoever. So don't sleep on them entirely, even though they're the clear underdog going into this series against the Dodgers.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him, Luke at WNST.net, and Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. I'm going Dodgers, Red Sox. By the way, Indians are the top choice at 9-4, Dodgers at 5-2, Astros are 6-1, Boston 9, the Nationals and the Cubs at 10, and the Yankees and Diamondbacks now at 12 to win the World Series this year. I'm out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are going to be watching baseball, and more baseball all weekend as we get ready for the Ravens to head to Oakland. I'll be watching the Terps play at 4 o'clock against Ohio State on Saturday as well. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. Hey, man, I got back WNST. It's baseball all weekend, and, of course, interested in the Maryland Terps, headed out to the Horseshoe this weekend to take on, oh, how I hate Ohio State. This guy is on the backfields for the Ravens all weekend, all week, I should say, to Owings Mills. There is an early trip out to Oakland on Friday night for the Ravens as they try to once again get acclimated to a different time zone, 8 hours different than the one that they were in just 10 days ago. The Ravens, shaky, struggling, questionable, headed out to Oakland where, Luke, I've been on the horn all week long with Oakland Raiders reporters, people, insiders, former executives, current executives. They're real worried there, dude. This is a very, very teetering ship that we're finding out there. Pressure is on Jack Del Rio this weekend.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have your starting quarterback, and we've seen firsthand how good Derek Carr can be really the last 2 years. When the Ravens went out there 2 years ago and lost a shootout. And then last year, the Raiders came into Baltimore and won. So it's certainly, I mean, they were having their issues even before Carr hurts his back against the Broncos this past Sunday. So it's clear that there's some pressure there. They're feeling pressure in playing at home, knowing that Kansas City's off to a heck of a start. You don't want to be 3-4 games out in the division before Halloween. I mean, that's not a good formula. You're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball big time. So that's clearly a team that has struggled. And, it's interesting. Strip away all the names and just look at the numbers defensively and offensively, and these teams are fairly similar. It's not a carbon copy, but, Ravens right now, 21st in total defense. Oakland, 20th in total defense. Ravens offense, 30th in yards per game. Oakland, 28th. So, there's a little bit of differentiation as you go through some of the numbers, but very clear that, the Raiders had huge expectations this year, and they haven't lived up to that to this point. And now they're going to be missing their quarterback for at least a couple weeks, the way it's going to look. And the Ravens, who, no one was pegging them as a Super Bowl contender, but certainly there were people who thought they'd be in the playoff race. Well, right now, we've asked the questions. We'll continue to talk about the offense. The defense, relative to expectations, hasn't been nearly as good the last couple of weeks. So you have two teams at a crossroads here, and I think when you get to week 5, you kind of decide, okay, which direction are you going to go? Are you going to kind of dust yourself off and get yourself back in decent position here over the next 5 weeks where you go into the second half of the season having a really good chance? Or could you potentially bury yourself where you face an uphill climb just to try to get back in the wild card contention? And I think that's where both these teams find themselves going into week 5.
For Flacco, and I know, he took the podium, and where are you on him? Give me an assessment outside the bounds of what you think his health is, and we're all guessing here, but I don't feel far off that he's not right, and I'm not the only one in saying that the mobility, the back, he would be the last guy to complain, but it doesn't feel right to me, and that's not to make an excuse for him, but it just doesn't feel like this looks like the same guy we've seen here the last 10 years.
Yeah, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. I'm concerned because of the offensive line when it's had its issues. I'm concerned because times where the offensive line has protected him, he's still not looking right, and he's still either anticipating pressure or getting rid of the ball too quickly or not having good footwork. I think the health has to be a part of it. Even if he's feeling fine at this point, he went through basically a month where he typically is doing his most important work preparing for the regular season, and he wasn't doing anything because he was rehabbing his back and getting treatment and trying to rest. And I think that's part of it. I'm concerned from a coaching standpoint. As you know, I was not a big fan of the move of bringing back Marty Mornhinweg, and part of that reason was Marty Mornhinweg was his quarterback's coach the last couple of years, where we've seen his footwork get sloppy, and we've seen him not making as good of decisions as he did with Gary Kubiak. And they didn't. They kept Mornhinweg. They didn't hire a quarterback's coach. I mean, I just think Joe's kind of broken right now, and I just don't know if it's an easy fix. I mean, I keep looking at this offense, trying to figure out, okay, well, they have speedy receivers. They're fast. They have a quarterback who can throw, has a strong arm, and they've averaged fewer yards per attempt than basically anyone in the league. I mean, it's just not a good situation right now. I do think that the health could potentially be part of it. I don't think he's necessarily going out there every day and playing in agony. I don't think it's necessarily that. But when you're talking about a back issue, has that impacted his flexibility? Has that impacted his ability to move around, even if he feels okay? I mean, we kind of talked about this with the Chris Tillman thing all year with the Orioles. Even if his shoulder wasn't hurting him every time he threw a pitch, he had to alter how he does things mechanically so that his shoulder doesn't hurt him. And you wonder the same thing about Joe. Let's face it. I mean, Joe's never been the most mobile quarterback, but earlier in his career, he can move around a little bit. He could.
Yeah, when you're completely immobile, it changes everything. I mean,
sure.
Absolutely. I mean, sure. And seeing that happen before our very eyes, it's just not buying him a second or two that he needs to dirt a ball, get out, stay safe, protect himself from a hit, or make a play, which he used to be able to do too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this whole thing just feels so. It's all encompassing. I don't think it's one issue. I think it's a plethora of issues facing Joe, that are hurting Joe Flacco and this offense collectively. I think it's very easy to just point to the injury. I don't think it's just the injury. I think it's very easy to point to just the offensive line. I don't think it's just the offensive line. I think it's everything. And that's what makes it really tough. That's what makes it very unsettling to think that they're just going to get this thing fixed. I mean, you mentioned all the issues with the Raiders. I mean, on paper, you go into the season and you say, guess what? Derek Carr is not going to play Week 5, and it's going to be E.J. Manuel. You're thinking, hey, with this defense and the Ravens going out there and facing a quarterback that hasn't played much lately, and I get it. They lost him in Buffalo 4 years ago, but it was such a different team back then. I don't know how much you can take away from that, but I continue to go back to the same question. How on earth is this team going to score points? And even though the Raiders haven't been a juggernaut defensively, that's the biggest issue I look at. And Joe Flacco isn't the only problem for the Ravens, but he's one of many problems for this Ravens offense right now. And it's just, again, I hate to be gloom and doom, but I just look at this thing and I'm just not quite sure how it's going to get turned around very easily.
All right, out to Oakland at 4 o'clock on Sunday. Go the Ravens to the Raiders, I should say. Boy, this Raiders team, right? No quarterback, all the statistical problems you talk about, and incredibly high expectations. And unlike in our division where it might be a little bit forgiving this side of Pittsburgh, boy, that division's not going to be forgiving. They've already lost to Denver. They've got San Diego coming up next week. They got a short rest against Kansas City. Kansas City looks like the best team in the NFL right now. They can really fall down the mountain here if things were to go wrong. And look, this is where the defense needs to step up against a backup quarterback that if they can stop the run, and everybody has against the Raiders, and force E.J. Manuel to throw the ball a little bit, that's when it gets fun for this defense when the ball goes up in the air, right?
Yeah, I mean, they have to. I mean, as much as we've talked about the offense, and look, the offense has been the biggest reason for their struggles. I mean, even the Jacksonville game, yes, they gave up 44 points. Was that more about the defense being horrendous or the offense being able to do absolutely nothing? I'd say it was more the latter. even though the defense certainly didn't play well.
To some degree, I almost throw that out right now. I don't expect that team to show up in Oakland on. You know what I mean? Like, I look at that game as something that's an outlier for now, although they didn't look good against Pittsburgh. But if they go out to Oakland and they're losing 31-0 at halftime, then we will know for sure that this is a broken ship, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to lose to Oakland. If you go and lose there by multiple possessions, then I just start to think, well, this team just stinks.
To a backup quarterback, too. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, but the thing that concerned me about this defense, I mean, clearly it's looking at this point like they're not going to have Brandon Williams again. And Harbaugh kind of alluded to that last Friday when I asked him about it. At the time, he said they knew it was going to be a multi-week injury. And last Friday, talking the Friday before the Steelers game, he said at that point that in the next week or two, I'll have my fingers crossed. So that tells me he's not going to play against the Raiders. That tells me maybe he has a shot against Chicago, but we're still looking at a Ravens defense that's not going to have Brandon Williams. And on top of that, the new injury to keep an eye on between now and Sunday is Jimmy Smith dealing with a little bit of an Achilles issue. Now, I saw him, went back and watched the tape. He left after Le'Veon Bell's 21-yard gain on Pittsburgh's final touchdown drive. Didn't look like anything catastrophic. Didn't go to the ground. Didn't have a major limp, but he was replaced by Marlon Humphrey at that point, who has kind of been replacing him periodically. I mean, he's subbed in for Jimmy Smith for a few series here and there, really the last couple weeks. And I don't know if that's a goal to try to keep Jimmy out of harm's way. We know his injury history. I know they clearly want to get Humphrey into the fold, but at the same time, you'd think they'd have him replacing Brandon Carr, not Jimmy Smith. So the whole thing's been a little weird in that regard. But Jimmy missing practice time this week with the Achilles. You hope it's nothing serious. But if you want to change the expectations of the Ravens defense, we saw this firsthand last December. Take Jimmy Smith out of the picture, and they're better equipped now with Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Carr. But Jimmy Smith has probably been. Quite possibly he's been their best player on either side of the ball so far this season. So if he can't go, if this Achilles issue is a little bit more than what we know it to be at this point in time, then you start to really worry about the ability of the defense. But assuming he plays, and let's just make that assumption for right now, going up against E.J. Manuel, going up against Marshawn Lynch, who, hey, I get it. It's a nice story, him coming back, playing in his hometown. But it's not as though he's been overwhelming, averaging 3.4 yards per carry. Crabtree's been banged up. Amari Cooper's been inconsistent. They've had their issues pushing the ball down the field, even with Derek Carr. You're right. This defense should feast. And as much as we've beaten up the offense, and that's been completely justified, this defense has underperformed relative to expectations. So, they need to get themselves back on track. And I know it's a challenge without Brandon Williams, but at the same time, all we've been hearing about for really the last couple of years, they've stockpiled all these defensive linemen. They've used early draft picks. They kept 8 on the roster when they could have kept players at other positions. Well, that depth needs to come through now, because just because Brandon Williams is out on the field, that doesn't mean or isn't out on the field. That doesn't mean your defense should completely fall apart. We saw in the past times when the Ravens played without Ray Lewis or Ed Reed, and there's some drop off. Don't get me wrong, that's natural, but it doesn't mean your defense should, not be able to stop the run whatsoever, and giving up huge chunk plays off the edge and not setting the edge and giving up big plays in the passing game like we saw a couple weeks ago. They need to get themselves. They need to reestablish themselves as an attacking defense like we saw in Week 1 and Week 2. And they gave up some pass plays against the Browns, but when it mattered, this defense was able to make plays. They have to do the same thing against E.J. Manuel. I mean, I get it. This guy's a fifth-year quarterback. It's not as though he hasn't played in the league, but this isn't an established commodity whatsoever. This is the kind of quarterback that if you're a good defense, you should be able to give him some fits. And to his credit, he actually moved the ball fairly well against Denver when he replaced Carr. But having a full week to prepare for E.J. Manuel, no reason the Ravens shouldn't be able to go out there and be very disruptive, and no reason that the Ravens should be going out there and giving up big 20, 25, 30 points on Sunday. If they are, then you're talking about this defense kind of being fraudulent as well.
You can find him, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. We are getting ready for game day. Lots of game days around here with baseball, hockey, college football all weekend, and, of course, the Ravens playing the late game, giving you a chance to sleep in a little bit on Sunday, as do the Terps, who play at 4 o'clock. Both games at 4 o'clock this weekend. You can find us out in the Buy at Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We're also out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. The morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never least, if there's any breaking news, you need these injury reports. We talked about Brandon Williams. Anything else that happens, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. Sign up. It's free. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis Kolatzis will be here each and every Thursday driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend. It is the SSV on WNST. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.